afternoon and welcome to Nest Midweek Briefing Inside Out, where we look at the developments in Russia and its war in Ukraine. Nest is a Centre for New Eurasian Strategies, and we are based in London and in Washington, D.C. We look and analyze Russia and the surrounding region. Today we are going to talk about a so-called Murmansk message, the message that Russian President Vladimir Putin conveyed when he was visiting the Arctic. And we will also look at public opinion in Russia, but surprisingly, not so much at Vladimir Putin or the war, but more at President Trump. Today we have our two excellent experts to talk about these developments. First of all, it's Nikolai Petrov, who you very well know, I'm sure, an expert on domestic politics. He, with colleagues, also wrote a report looking at Russia's infrastructure projects and projection of its power in the Arctic. And also Ella Paneyakh, our experts in sociology, who will be talking more about public opinion in Russia. Well, first of all, I would like to start with Nikolai. Nikolai, so what was this message about? What did Putin say in Murmansk? Why did he go there? And why do we think that it's important for Western audience to be aware of what he was saying there?
Thank you, Katia. I think that it's extremely important, and I would compare Murmansk with several speeches made by Putin with what he did in Munich in 2007. But that time it was about the crisis of the present world order. Now we've seen contours of the new one which Putin offers. And there are several, Murmansk is a very special place to start with. It's the end or the beginning of the North Sea route. It's the biggest port which is not connected to Baltics, which is the open way to the world ocean. And it's developing in a very fast way. Putin did say that it will become 3 times bigger in near future. So I would see several messages sent by Putin in his 3 presentations, first at the forum, then at the submarine, and later at the headquarters of the North Sea route. The first one is that America and Russia are in Arctic and around all the time, but America is there for 200 years, while Russia is for 500 years. China is somehow on the side, and this is very peculiar that Putin devoted a good portion of his speech to the United States, and he did mention China only once, together with Belarus and United Arab Emirates. Russia is the largest Arctic power, and this is the next message sent by Putin. It does have very powerful and expanding icebreaker fleet and navy is planned to develop till 2050. The role of Arctic for Russia is big and it's growing. The Northern Sea route should become the section of the longer Trans-Arctic transport corridor from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok, and it will connect, according to Putin, the world's industrial, agricultural, energy centers and consumer markets. And the final thing, which is very important, Putin's appeal to launch global international projects in the Arctic, with the participation of friendly countries, states which are friendly to Russia, and possibly Western states.
Right. So do you think then in this case, Nikolai, he was more messaging to the United States? It's very interesting that, as you mentioned here, did not say anything about China, or he just mentioned China in passing. Who this messaging was directed at? Well, obviously domestic audience, but not only. What do you think?
I think that American audience, and especially Republican activists who are involved now in working out strategy with regard to Russia, this is the main audience for Putin. And if the message didn't come through effectively, then Kirill Dmitriev, who came to the United States yesterday, should repeat those ideas and those proposals Putin formulated in his speech.
Yes, and Kirill Dmitriev, just to remind, he's Russia's envoy to develop business relations with the West. And he was also part of the recent negotiations in Saudi Arabia. Nikolai, do you think that Trump will be receptive, or circles around Trump would be receptive to this message? Well, after all, it seems to be that Putin was again trying to appeal to Trump's ego and his worldview that there are big powers who can divide the world and rule. Do you think that's something that the Trump administration has already picked up, or something that could potentially even tilt their stance in the negotiations?
First, I think that this is not only rhetoric from Putin's side. There are a lot of moves made for, say, last 10, 15 years. So Russia did invest into what appears now its dominant position in the Arctic, starting from 2007. And it's pretty well described in our recent report, Mistress of the Seas, where we did try to explain different details of geostrategic projects of Russia. So I think that it should be very attractive, or at least the Kremlin thinks that it should be very attractive to President Trump due to one understandable reason. It goes about the triangle, the United States, China, and Russia. And in this particular message, Putin offers cooperation to the United States, which otherwise, if the United States will not accept his offer, then Russia will cooperate more intensively with China, and this is not perhaps what present-day administration wants.
Yes, that's very interesting. And of course, Putin also mentioned two other countries, European countries that have just recently joined NATO, Sweden and Finland. What do you think he was trying, again, to message to these two countries and the West more generally by mentioning, picking out specifically on these two countries?
I think that Putin enjoys the situation when Russia is the dominant force in the Arctic, which can overplay due to its military might and icebreakers fleet all other actors, including Finland and Sweden. He did mention these two countries in, I would say, a negative way, saying that until now we had very good relations with them, but now they are changing side and they are different. So this can have negative consequences for them. There was a kind of a threat, but not very clear threat made by him. But I think what is interesting is the fact that Putin feels like he's master in the house, because his position, Russia's position in Arctic, is strongest of all.
Yes, and you, of course, were studying very well this position, as you mentioned, for your report. Could you maybe tell us the main takeaway from your research about the Arctic? In particular, if I remember correctly, you were saying that quite a few projects, infrastructure projects, are being currently developed and a lot of money being poured into that. But how also do you think, to what extent is it merely talk, or will they really take shape? And what do Western policymakers should take from it? How should they view that? Is it really enough meat there for them to be worried?
So far, Russia is developing long-term strategy with regard to this region. It's partly connected with the fact that Arctic is considered to be, the golden field where a lot of mineral resources are located. And it has been stressed by Putin that it's very important for Russia because it shapes about 10% of Russia's industrial production and of even more so of Russian export. And I think this is very important leverage found by Putin when he understood that the idea of transforming Russia into global energy superpower would not work well. He did understand that what Russia can exploit its the geostrategic position where there are no competitors. Russia is biggest by the territory state in the world, and here in the Arctic, Russia is much better prepared than anybody else, not to speak about the idea to have this transportation corridor. And I would emphasize that here Putin's thinking goes in line with the President Trump's thinking, because Greenland is another important thing which gives the United States, if only they will control Greenland, the control over Northwestern Passage, while Russia enjoys control over Northern Sea Route.
Yes, so indeed, Putin also spoke about historical interests of America, about Alaska, and indeed he seems to want to return to this 19th century partition of the world. Nikolai, maybe just one question to you more before we go to speak about public opinion in Russia. How does this Murmansk speech in particular, and how does it play out into a broader picture, particularly within the recently, let's say, quiet developments in the peace negotiations? President Trump did say that he was very angry at President Putin. Then he said he was angry at both. Then he said that he would introduce tariffs against Russia and sanctions as well, secondary sanctions. How do you think the Kremlin perceives that? Do they really believe that more sanctions against their energy sector is something that could damage their situation in the war?
I think the Kremlin strategy is to demonstrate President Trump that Ukraine and the war in Ukraine is not that important. This is tiny question. The problem where the United States should not invest a lot of efforts, while there are many other much more beneficial things to decide and to discuss with Russia. So Ukraine and the war should be left for Europeans, and Russia can discuss with the United States different large-scale projects. And as I think understanding that the war cannot be stopped in a short while, and thus all those hopes and promises given by President Trump are, look a little bit groundless. But here Putin wants to offer something of a very large scale, which can be sold to American public and which can be sold first to President Trump.
Well, thank you very, very much, Nikolai. I'm sure I will come back to you later with more questions. But now I would like, especially as you mentioned the public, I would like to talk a little bit about public opinion in Russia. And before we move to our next speaker, Ella Paneyakh, I would like to remind our audience that you can ask us questions. Please use the chat function or the Q&A. I am able to see questions coming in on the screen. And now, Ella, let's talk a little bit about our database, Nestoscope, as we call it within our team, which is able to track the popularity of certain political leaders or political figures. And it was very interesting that you noticed how within our the data that we received, that Trump actually scored higher at some points than President Putin. So how could you explain that?
Well, our wonderful team of statisticians and the prominent IT people started tracking presence of different political figures in Russian-speaking kind of media landscape, and they created something called Media Presence Index. So could you please show the picture with Trump and Putin? No, not this one. Another one. The first one. Yes, thank you very much. So what we notice is practically since the beginning of coming to his post of the President of the United States, Trump dominates Putin in Russian-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking, and we have some other languages, but not English, some other regional languages in post-Soviet world. So Trump seriously dominates Putin in media sphere. He is more discussed, every his move is more discussed, even when he doesn't do something specific that concerns Russia or Russian-Ukrainian war. And when Putin and Trump generate some news together, you can see the peaks where Putin and Trump had the first phone call and then negotiation in Riyadh. Trump is kind of more mentioned, more discussed than Putin, even when they generate the mutual news. But Trump also generates lots of news for Russia that do not help Putin's media presence at all. He is able to generate big peaks of his own media presence without kind of helping Putin to be more present too. Probably everyone could say that Trump generates lots of noise in media elsewhere in the world, which is true, but you need to understand how much Russian media sphere is dominated by Putin otherwise. Can we have the second slide, please? No, the one that had been shown first. Putin and other Russians. Okay. Let me say it in words. If you take foreign figures out of the picture and show Putin and his like nearest, biggest political figures within Russia on this same graph, you can see how much the informational sphere is dominated by media presence of Putin alone. He dwarfs everyone, but Trump seems to dwarf Putin, which means it would have been very easy for Trump now to talk to Russian audience in case he would want to. Like liberal opposition, international community have very much trouble trying to appeal to Putin's electoral base or to Russians in general, only to a small chunk of like really liberal people. But here we see that Trump is interesting to everyone in Russia. Trump is interesting and appealing to core Putin base, to social conservatives, to losers of modernization, and to militarists. And these are three overlapping groups who form Putin's base. The moment Trump decides to start talking to them directly, he's probably kind of reaccessible for him. That's what I am saying.
Well, that's really very interesting, Ella, especially the peaks that you talked about and how even Trump, almost at the same level as Putin, at some points, for example, when they have had their phone conversation. What kind of message would you recommend if we had a chance to transmit our recommendations to the Trump administration? Would you recommend them to use? What would be, what really will be most receptive, I guess, to the Russian ear? And maybe we should also talk about different segments of society. As you said, that so far Trump or the West more generally is really just heard by the liberal segment of society. But what should, in your view, Trump, if he wanted really to achieve peace and finish the war, what should he be saying to the Russian public?
Well, first, Trump is not nearly like Putin in Russian media. Trump overwhelms Putin in Russian media, despite the fact that these media are to large extent controlled by Putin, even though when they appear in news together, doing something together, like a phone call, Trump is much more present than Putin. Second, I wouldn't recommend actually sending this kind of message to Russian audience, to anyone, because we have it enough. We have enough social conservative messages and militaristic messages and messages about Russia as a great world power sent by, our own government and its supporters. But I think that it's a threat for Putin, and it's becoming more and more threat the longer Trump is being nice to Putin publicly, which he does, and the more Putin in exchange show that he's also charmed with Trump, that he's also having lots of respect. Putin said already, not Putin, his press secretary said already that Putin went to the church and prayed for Trump when there was an assassination attempt, by the way. So the moment Trump in exchange starts to behave with Putin the way he behaves with most of the world leaders, especially the adversaries, starts dissing him like he dissed Zelensky, for example, it might really hurt Putin, not in the eyes of like each and every Russian, but in the eyes of his core base that share that, matches ideas of world politics and personalistic ideas of world politics. And his own public image is way too similar in some sense to Trump's for him to gain from this, like Zelensky did, for example, instead of losing the respect and probably even like support of his own base. I think his base is sensitive to such things.
Mm. Thank you, Ella. We have a question exactly about exactly about that, about Trump's popularity. What does it really mean? He has a strong. Does it mean that he has strong support, public support in Russia? Are we able to track that from our data, or we can only say that we cannot differentiate within the race?
We cannot say it from our data, but there are other data from conventional public opinion pollsters. The moment the negotiations started, Russians started to see the United States less as an adversary and more as maybe a friend or ally. It's still like in negatives, but the negatives are much smaller than it used to be during the Biden era. I wouldn't say Trump already has lots of support in Russia. There are third countries where Trump really has lots of support, like India. But he's interesting. He's much more interesting to the Russian public and to Russian news producers, even the governmental ones, that Putin is. And the message he sends generally very usually mirrors the points in Putin's message that appeal to Russian public. But these points are put in a much more, interesting way for media and from a much more powerful figure. So I think it's not going to be good for Russia in terms of development of democracy or something else, but it might be really a threat for public opinion on Putin.
Okay, thank you very much, Ella. Let's look at some other questions that we have in the chat. Well, very briefly, Ella, maybe if you can reply to Margaret Light. Surely Trump's prominence in Russian mediascape reflect choices of editors and journalists, not the choices of Russian public. So we have to talk about, clarify maybe which media particularly we're talking here about, Ella.
There are media directly controlled by Russian government, of course, but it's also about blogs in Telegram, in Russian social platforms that work pretty much like Facebook, but we have a couple of local platforms that work about the same way. So it's hard every time to see lots of editors here. It's just individual speakers or individual speakers with small teams that dominate this sphere. And they are dependent on their viewers. They might be working under a censorship that might be obliged to not speak about something. They might be obliged to speak about something in certain tone, but not another. But they choose in this frames, they choose what to speak of, and they're trying to find something interesting for the public.
Okay, thank you very much, Ella. I know we are running out of time, but we've just got a couple of more questions, which I think, Nikolai, probably directed more to you. Let me just read them out very quickly. The first one is from Dr. Maria Ian. There was a statement made by Putin at about the same time at these talks in Murmansk on how the United Nations should oversee elections in Ukraine. That appears a very clear trap and intention of aggression, even though it's unlikely to be implemented, in my opinion. Was that a way to appease some hardcore individuals in his inner circle, or was it clear indication that Putin doesn't mean anything he says in the way in which the West interprets it? And Murmansk is just another cover-up for some kind of military action. And the other question is on the bilateral deal-making model that Putin seems to be offering to Trump. What could be the impact on the rest of the Arctic states, Nordics and Canada? And I've just quote the last question from Dmitry Bereshkov about what could that mean for the people in Arctic, and how this overall the models of great power engagement can impact the populations there. Nikolai, please.
Okay, answering the first question, I would take it as trolling. Both President Trump and President Putin are involved into trolling of President Zelensky, whom both of them do not like, to put it mildly. And this is aimed to humiliate President Zelensky and nothing more, in my view. And it doesn't play any role if to speak about Putin and his inner circle or his team in Russia. In case of Arctic states, I would say that it's very dangerous development for Arctic states if Russia and the United States will make a deal without them. And here comes the Arctic Council, which did work even when the war has started in Ukraine, but which doesn't work now. And in my view, it's needed to start again the work of the Arctic Council, which will help not only to discuss problems of how the Arctic should be developed, not bilaterally, but with all Arctic states, but will help also to discuss problems of indigenous people, like the one put in one of our questions. And it's important that both Trump and Putin do not look at them or do not take them into account. And in Russia's view, Arctic is huge by its territory, but it's empty, and the number of inhabitants is well, pretty small. And the Arctic Council here should play a very important role also, letting indigenous people to speak about their interests and letting their rights and their interests to be taken into account.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Nikolai. Thank you very much, Ella. Thank you to our viewers who tuned in to our midweek briefing. Thank you for asking your questions. You can find more information on that and our other reporting on our website, nestcenter.org. We'll be back next week. Please tune in again. Thank you.